Армысыздар, Салмақты сұхбат атты онлайн кездесуінің бүгінгі қонағы АқШ-тың Медицин университетінің эмерит профессоры, Назарбаев университетінің қазақ тілі мен түркітану кафедрасының меңгерушісі, филология ғылымдарының докторы Юлай Шамилоғлы. Қош келдіңіз, қалыңыз қалай?
Жаман емес, сізше?
Тамаша, рахмет. Hello everyone, let's make a start. Welcome to our online meeting. I'm Қуаныш Жұмабекұлы. We are all very pleased to have Mr. Юлай here tonight. Dr. Юлай Шамилоғлы is a professor emeritus University of Wisconsin Medicine, professor in the chair department of Kazakh language and Turkic studies, Nazarbayev University. Mr. Юлай, for the start, please tell us about your education.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation, and I'm sorry about the technical problems. So I was born and raised in New York City. My parents are of Kazan Tatar origin. My father was from a Tatar from Bashkortostan, and my mother's family was Mishar. And so my father was in Germany after World War II as a prisoner of war, and then he married my mother in Turkey. I was born in 1958. I went to public school in New York City. I went to a famous high school, the Bronx High School of Science. After that, I entered the university at Columbia College in the city of New York, which is a part of Columbia University. I majored in Middle East languages and cultures, with an emphasis on Turkish studies, but also I did a lot of work in Arabic and Islamic studies. And afterwards, I stayed at Columbia University for a PhD in the Department of History, and I studied Middle Eastern and Central Asian history there. So I was very lucky. I had a lot of really, really great teachers in Turkish studies. Now in the United States, you don't have that much left in the kind of classical Turkish studies, Turkish and Ottoman philology. But I was lucky that we had very, very good professors. And I was also very lucky that we had good professors in the history program.
Could you tell about your dissertation?
Well, one of these really, really interesting topics that I started reading about as an undergraduate was about a system of tribal organization in the later Khanates of Kazan, of Crimea, Astrakhan, Kasimov, and Siberia in the 15th to 18th centuries. And that was a system of state organization where in each of the states you had four individuals called the Karachi Beys, Karachi Bekleri. In Russian sources, they were called knyaz or various things. And they had a special role in selecting the Khan, in ratifying the decisions and the yarliks of the Khan. Sometimes they played a role in getting rid of the Khan, and they were involved in running the military affairs and also in the foreign relations of the state. And so I was very curious about what this was about. And some people thought of them as clans or as magnates, or siloviki or something like that. So I realized that these are actually the leaders of four tribes in each of the states. And in the case of the Khanate of Kazan and Crimea, this was the Shirin, the Baran, Arghun, and Kupchak tribes. But I was curious to understand where this came from. And what I discovered was that if you study the sources for the Golden Horde in the 13th and 14th centuries, you find the same kind of system. The names are different. It's not the Karachibek, it's the Ulusbek. And the leader of them is the Bekleribek. So what that means is we have a totally new way of understanding the political structure of the Golden Horde in the 13th, 14th centuries. I believe that you had the same system in the Ilkhanate, in the Chagatai Khanate, and perhaps in Yuan China. And one of the interesting things is that actually it's likely that the tribes in the Golden Horde were the Kiyat, Kongrat, Sijut, and Mangut. So it gives us a new way of understanding the ethnic and tribal history of the Chingizid states.
You know that you also spent a semester at the Department of Altaic at Szeged University in Hungary.
Yes, the University of Szeged. At that time, it was called the József Attila Tudomány Egyetem. Now they call themselves, they rebranded themselves as Szeged University. So I was very, very fortunate in that I knew while I was still a PhD student that Indiana University was interested in me in Bloomington. And they had a need for somebody who did Altaic studies, not just Turkic languages and history. And so upon the recommendation of my teachers, I went on a fellowship to Szeged University for 1 semester in the fall of 1982. I studied with Professor Andras Ronatos. Professor Maria Ivanic was not there, she was in Vienna, but Arpad Berta and some István Zimony and some other Nagy Eva were there. And so I studied Old Turkic there. I couldn't study Old Turkic in the United States, or certainly not at Columbia University when I was a student. And I studied Chuvash language, and I studied the history of Turkic linguistics, and I also studied some Mongolian there.
Okay, good.
I value very greatly the time I spent there because I think it gave me a very, very strong third education in Turkic studies.
Okay. Okay. The next question is, please tell us about your interest in Shahabuddin Marjani.
Aha. So, as a young American Turkologist of Tatar origin, I was always interested somewhat in the history of the Tatars and in scholars, earlier Tatar scholars from before the Soviet period. And my father had given me photocopies of 2 pictures. One of them is of Abdullah Tukay, who was the Tatar national poet. And the other one was of Shahabuddin Marjani. But there's very, very little I could read about Shahabuddin Marjani. And so by the time I was finishing my PhD dissertation in 1985, 1986, I started to try to find works by Marjani, especially his 2-volume history, the Mustafad al-Akhbar fi Ahwal Qazan wa Bulgar. And the first one was published in the 1880s, and the second volume was published later in the 1890s. And so that's of course in Tatar, but the Tatar in that period, or the way he wrote, because he was a great scholar of Arabic and Islamic studies, it's not the same as modern Tatar. Some of it is Chagatai. He used a lot of Arabic, he used a lot of Persian, and very, very complicated terminology sometimes. But what I understood in the few things I read about Marjani is that he was considered to be one of the greatest scholars, Muslim scholars in the Russian Empire. And actually it's true, he was a great scholar. And even today, you have Chrestomathies or readers of fiqh, of Islamic studies that copy his works, but they don't know that he's not an Arab. So even today, so in the Middle East, they consider him to be a great scholar of Islamic law. But this work, when I started reading it, I realized that he was doing some very, very interesting things. He was making connections with the past in certain ways. He was referring to folklore sometimes, but he was also using real historical sources and really using numismatic evidence. And what I understood was that he was creating a theory of Tatar history. And so the basic lines in his theory of Tatar history is that there used to be Volga Bulgaria, and then afterward was the Golden Horde, and afterwards was the Khanate of Kazan, and then afterwards you have the Muslims of the Middle Volga region in the 18th and 19th century. They're united by the name, and he thought that he advocated for the use of the name Tatar. Some people considered themselves Bulgars or Muslims. So he advocated for the name Tatar, he advocated for the name of common history, and he advocated that this territory of the Middle Volga region was their home, maybe their ancient home. So this is a theory of national history, okay? So what you have in the late 19th century already is the Tatars having their own theory of national history. This is in contrast to what Ismail Gasprinsky or Gasparalo was doing, where he really didn't have a territorialized identity for the Muslims of the Russian Empire. You're a Muslim Turk. You're in Turkestan or Yakutia or in Moscow or St. Petersburg. We're all one muhtariyat. We're all one milli autonomy or muhtariyat, so an state without territory. But he created the specific territorial identity. And I think that was the first in the Turkic world. So really very, very important. And that's why Tatars and the other Muslims in the Russian Empire had difficulty during the Muslim congresses agreeing on whether, you know, their territory should be that way or no territory, because the Tatars had a totally different theory of history.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very influential on Kazakhs and very influential on Bashkirs too. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. You know that you are studying a lot of things. However, it's very interesting for me. How did you get interested in the study of pandemics?
There's two things. One is that as I'm both a Turkologist in terms of history of languages, and I'm also a historian. And as a historian, I read different kinds of books. Sometimes my teacher recommended them. Sometimes I just was interested as a student of history. And so there's a very famous book, Plagues and Peoples by William McNeill, who was a very interesting historian at the University of Chicago. And so he wrote in one paragraph, one abzats, that he thinks the Mongol world empire collapsed because of bubonic plague. In Russian, chuma, bubonnaya chuma. In English, bubonic plague. In Kazakh, oba. In Arabic, ta'un. And I thought, wow, that's interesting, because we know that the Mongol world empire collapses in the middle of the 14th century. And so we know that the disease spread from Kaffa in Crimea to Constantinople, from Constantinople to Alexandria in Egypt and Sicily, and from there to Europe. Today, maybe we have a somewhat different understanding. But if the disease was present in the Crimea, it means that it was in the Golden Horde. So I started looking for sources. I started rereading sources, and I understood that there is information in Arabic sources, in Turkic sources, in Italian sources, even in Russian sources. The problem is not that there's no sources. The problem is nobody thought that information was important. And I used that to reimagine the middle of the 14th century in terms of loss of population, political disruption and anarchy, increase in religiosity, the end of Turkic literary languages for about 5-6 decades, beginning in around 1360 until 1410s, and so on, and the decline of cities, the collapse. So not just the collapse of the Golden Horde. Later on, when the population starts to rebound, like around the 1430s, 1440s, the Khanate of Kazan is so small. The Khanate of Crimea is so small. The Khanate of Kasimov is so small. The Khanate of Siberia is so small. The Khanate of Astrakhan is so small. Why? Because the population was much smaller. So I find that to be a very, very powerful tool for explaining transformation, social, political, economic, cultural transformation in the middle of the 14th century. Since then, I've also looked at the plague from the 6th to the 8th centuries, and there was also plague in the late 19th century. So even Mir Jakob Dulat wrote about that, and I found that material recently. But nobody thinks it's important. But now we know pandemics are important, and this pandemic today, the coronavirus, that's mild. That's nothing.
You wrote an article on the names of New World plants in Turkic languages. Why did you write on that topic?
Well, first of all, this was for a festschrift, for the Jubilee, a volume in honor of Kengisbay Musayev, who just passed away recently. He had, I knew him through Adham Tenishev. He was in the Soviet Committee of Turkologists. And in 1991, I had invited him to the University of Wisconsin-Madison to teach Kazakh. And so one of his fields is lexicography. And I thought, in order to honor him, I'd like to do something on lexicography, but what is a good topic? And one of my hobbies is cooking and eating and enjoying good food and many, many different cuisines in the world. And so I always thought about why is it that some cuisines are different from other cuisines. And as somebody who's a historian growing up in the United States, I know that we all learn in the United States that there are many, many products or many plants, some animals that originated in the New World, in Russian, Novy Svet, okay? So we're thinking potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, bulgarsky perец, corn, as in maize. If we think of cashew, chocolate, all kinds of things, various kinds of beans like fajoli, the long string beans, and so on. All of this before 1500 or before 1492, these plants did not exist. Pumpkin, squash, they did not exist in the old world. Can you imagine Italian food without tomatoes? Can you imagine Hungarian food without paprika? Can you imagine eating in Istanbul without eating tomatoes or fasulye or all kinds of other things? Can you imagine Central Asian plates without tomatoes, without askabak, without pumpkins and squash and things like that? So I thought, wow. So this is something that as an American Turkologist, I understand is important. And it's also connected with something interesting where you can do in a scholarly way. You can say, okay, so what are these various things? So for example, so it also explains why some of the names are so different, because they don't go back to Old Turkic usually. So if you have something like sunflower, Turkish ayçiçek, in Tatar kunbağış. Why? Because it keeps following the sun, but it has different names. Let's say potato, okay? So in Tatar it's jiralması, or in Kazakh kartop from kartoffel in German, or in Turkish it's patates, and you also have in Tatar berengi, and probably that's farangi, so from the Franks, from the Europeans. So it's fun. It's fun. But it's also connected with trying to imagine what Turkic cuisine was like before 1500. If we didn't have these kinds of foods in Xinjiang. Why is Xinjiang food, Uyghur food, so fascinating? Because the way they use peppers and the way they use tomatoes and they use all kinds of plants, it's different from what goes on in Central Asia. It's different from Azerbaijan, different from Turkish cooking. Maybe they were much more similar 500 years ago.
You're right. You were also a supervisor for 12 PhD students at the University of Wisconsin Madison. On what topics did your students write their dissertations?
I was very, very fortunate to have 12 really exceptional students who did PhDs. It wasn't easy. It was sometimes an experiment because I wanted to encourage students not just to work on Turkic languages, but to combine it with contemporary international theory. And also, my poor students from Turkey, they had to learn Russian, they had to learn French or German. So two of my students worked on Uzbek literature as post-colonial literatures. Which is post-colonial theory is very, very important for understanding some of these things. Some of my students worked on Kazakh and or Tatar, Kazan Tatar verbal system or syntax using modern linguistic theories. One of my students worked on the Turkestan album, which was a very, very famous collection of photographs from the 19th century presented to the emperor.
Good.
And it's just amazing how important that can be in terms of cultural studies and colonial studies. A couple of my students also worked on Islam in the Russian Empire. One of my students worked on Musa Jarullah Bigi, who was kind of dressed very, very modern. He was a specialist on the Quran. He taught in emigration in Finland, in Tokyo. He died in Cairo, where he's buried. So he was somebody who wrote about fasting. You know, Uzun Günlerde Oruç is one of the titles for one of his works. He was the teacher of Arabic for a very influential Japanese scholar. Another one of my students worked on Muhammad Murad Ramzi, who was a great Naqshbandi sheikh who wrote a history of the Tatars in Arabic. Why would somebody write a history of the Tatars in Arabic? Because he's writing it for the other ulama. But these are all very, very interesting studies, very, very innovative. And I think the reason for that is that instead of being descriptive, they are using theories drawn from comparative literature or linguistics or history or religious studies or cultural studies. And I think these are all very, very important contributions, and I'm really, really proud of all of them.
Okay. What do you think are important priorities in the study of the Turkic languages and the cultures?
That is something we could talk a whole hour about. So I think we have to think, okay, this is the year 2020. What are some of the kinds of things we have to prioritize? I already mentioned one is that we need to have an international Turkology. International Turkology means that it's not enough to, let's say, know Kazakh and Russian and then you produce international scholarship. It's not enough to know Turkish and nothing else. I think that we need to be cosmopolitan scholars, where we need to know that there are theories about history or literature or linguistics or climate or disease or other folklore, where you can benefit from the kinds of tools that people have developed for the study of European folklore or different schools of linguistics in Europe or North America, and so on. So I think that's the first thing is in terms of preparing students, we need to do that. I'm really concerned that, for example, in the United States, that Turkology will survive only as Ottoman studies. I'm very concerned that you can study Ottoman history, but Turkish literature is a dying field in North America, for example. And to study a language and culture without literature is a problem. So, but what about like Uzbek, Kazakh, Tatar, Yakut, Tuvan, Chuvash language and literature? That's a problem. And I always like to say that it's, you know, that the Americans don't need Turkology. I just heard that the School of Oriental and African Studies in London is in big trouble. And that was another important center for Turkish studies. And sometimes departments of Turkology in Europe have shut down. So I think it's important for us. So in the Turkic world, if we do not make Turkology a priority, because it's the study of who we are and who we were and who we will be, it's not important for anybody else. But the next thing is, we are in a period in history where many small languages and peoples are assimilating or dying out. Today because of disease, but also because of assimilation by a dominant culture such as Russian culture or Arabic or Persian or Chinese culture. Some of it is because of political pressure being put on peoples. I myself have close relations in Tatarstan, so I know how they're trying to destroy education in Kazan Tatar, in Tatarstan. So this is a moment where we need to document languages which are under danger of disappearing, okay? So I think what we need to do is we need to have students who go and study small endangered languages, record vocabulary, record folklore, folk knowledge, oral tradition, maybe try to do grammatical studies as well. So I think that is a priority in our field. Another thing, of course, is producing or publishing new sources, evaluating sources, using new methodologies. And I think another thing is studying each other's literature and studying each other's languages. So I think one of the really, really important considerations is that during the time of the Soviet Union, that you never had, let's say, Uzbeks studying Turkmen literature or Turkmen literature specialists studying Uzbek literature. I know, because of the work of one of my master students who worked on the first Turkmen novel, that Abdullah Qadiri, the great Uzbek writer, was influential on the first Turkmen novel. But in Soviet times, what you studied was, you could study comparative grammar of Russian and Kazakh, but you didn't do a comparative grammar of Kazakh and Uzbek, or of Kazakh and Turkmen, or of Kazakh and Tatar. So I think we need to start doing closer comparisons between the languages, the literature, historical sources, and the folklore. And the last thing is that in Soviet times, there was very much what in English we call a tunnel vision, that my colleague Damir Ishakov in Kazan, who's an ethnographer and historian and sociologist, he says, we know Tatar villages in Tatarstan, but we don't really know Tatar villages in Bashkortostan, because we were not supposed to study Bashkortostan. So I think that we should transcend political boundaries, and especially today. So this means that if there's Kazakhs in Mongolia or Xinjiang or in another country, why shouldn't you study it? If there are Turkmen in Afghanistan and Uzbekistan in addition to Turkmenistan, why shouldn't you study them? So I think we need to move away from thinking that you have one political unit and you can only study that. I mean, so I'll give you one more example. Among other things, of course, I'm a specialist on the Golden Horde. I can explain why some of the epics, like Alpamush or some of the others, or Manas, they keep referring to geography that seems to come from the West. Why? Because people migrated. After the collapse of the Golden Horde in the 14th century, you had the rise of tribal confederations, and you had migrations also because of climate change. The environmental history became very, very cold in the 16th century, 16th, 17th centuries especially. So you had migration. So if the origin of certain terminology in the epics, in Manas or Alpamush, seems to be connected to the Golden Horde, why shouldn't you study other geographies, for example?
Okay. As you know, you are now chair of the Department of Kazakh Language and the Turkic Studies at Nazarbayev University. What do you think? Why was the university established, and what brought you here? What do you hope to accomplish?
That's a really, really important question. So, as you know, I'm a professor emeritus at the University of Wisconsin, which means retired professor, honorary professor, because I worked there for 28 years after working at Indiana University for 6 years. And so I'm very, very lucky that in 2009, I began to be involved in the planning for the establishment of Nazarbayev University. And the University of Wisconsin-Madison, through my efforts, became the strategic partner for the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. That school no longer exists because we now reorganize the schools, so there's a new school of sciences and humanities. So that's what I'm in. So Nazarbayev, I think that Elbası, so President Nazarbayev, he values education, and I think there were various earlier attempts through the Bolashak program to send students abroad, which is very expensive. Education in the United States is very, very expensive. To try to build something with the Kazakh British Petroleum University, KBTU, with KIMEP University and Eurasian National University, and they never produced the results that he wanted to create an international, real, true international level education in Kazakhstan, like you can get in Singapore. I think Lee Kuan Yew was very influential on this model, or like in the Gulf, or what you can get by going to the United Kingdom or Australia or the United States or Canada. So I think the mission of Nazarbayev University is to gather the best international experience and to share it with Kazakhstan. So I think we do that in part by having strategic partners such as the University of Wisconsin-Madison or Duke University, Lee Kuan Yew University, Cambridge University, University of Pennsylvania, etc. The other way is to have international faculty here. The hiring process is very rigorous. It goes through many international selection processes and consultation. And so I think I think what Kazakhstan is trying to do is to develop intellectual capital here, to create, as President Nazarbayev would say, a knowledge society. I think this is really, really important because I've devoted my whole life to education. So to me, as they say in English, this is music to my ears. So I thought when I was first involved in the project that maybe when I'm old and retired, that if they need me to come out for a year to help something, that I would help somehow. I never anticipated that as a young man, barely eligible to retire in the United States, that I would be invited to come in order to build Turkology and to be chair of the Department of Kazakh Language and Turkic Studies. It's a new department. It used to be a Department of Kazakh Language, Literature, and Culture. And what the university wanted to do was to create an international department where Kazakh language was a part and to participate in international level research. And I think that's really only possible if you place Kazakh language and Kazakh studies within an international context. So it's like having Russian studies, maybe Russian studies you can say is international, but with all due respect, I would say Belarus philology and Ukrainian philology are not international fields, or just a little bit international field. There is a Ukrainian Studies Center at Harvard. So I think the way for Kazakh language and Kazakh studies and the study of Kazakh literature, culture, etc., to become international is to have it under the umbrella of Turkology. And I think this is the biggest honor of my life. In Wisconsin for 28 years, usually I was by myself, or I had one or two colleagues helping me, or later Funda Hanım joined, my spouse, Funda Güven, joined my department. She was always helping me as a lecturer. And now the notion that a Tatar boy from the Bronx in New York City can be the chair of the largest department of Turkology in the European and American worlds, in the English language world, that's a tremendous honor. I couldn't say no to that. And what I'm trying to do here is, first of all, work with my colleagues in Kazakh language and culture to help them internationalize, become more familiar with English, for example, if their English is not good yet, to become more familiar with international technology for teaching, international methodology, and international theory for their research. And we've also been hiring international faculty such as Funda Güven and Janine Dayeli and Halit Akarja to create a true international Turkology. We have a larger international faculty in Turkology than most European programs in Turkology. This is amazing. Plus, we also have the large Kazakh language component. And so I want to replicate what we did in Madison by combining knowledge of the language, knowledge of cultural production, knowledge of European languages and Asian languages, knowledge of Turkic languages, plus international theory to create a new kind of Turkology. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to share this with Kazakhstan and the rest of the Turkic world too.
Mm-hmm. What is your recommendation to young people interested in Turkology?
You know, I can be seen as a little bit of a hypocrite because I started studying Turkology when I was a first-year student at the university. But I think it's really important to have a good general education first. I think in some countries, for example, Turkey, that you study Turkology as an undergraduate, and that means that by the time you're finished, maybe you haven't studied Russian, maybe you haven't studied Arabic, maybe you haven't studied French, maybe you haven't studied German, maybe you haven't studied English, maybe you haven't taken too much in linguistics, maybe you haven't taken too much in history. I think that for Turkology to be stronger, it would be great if we have students studying various different fields, having good knowledge of 1, 2, 3 languages, having a good general education in literature, having a good general education in an academic discipline. So I would love to see young people come for a master's and PhD in Turkology after already having studied 2 or 3 years of Arabic, or 2 or 3 years of Persian, or 2 or 3 years of Chinese, or knowing some Sanskrit, or knowing some Japanese, or knowing Russian, or German, or French, or Hungarian, or Latin. All of these are really, really important. And I think the greatest weakness of an education in Turkology starting as a first-year student in the university is that you don't have the possibility when you're young to learn all of these other things. And I should say that that's also reflecting my personal experience. I'm very, very lucky that I met at the very beginning of my undergraduate education, Professor Tibor Halashikun, who was the first student of Gyula Nemet. He used to teach at Ankara University. Later, Mehmet Fuat Köprülü sent him to Columbia University to establish Turkology. And after we started working in my first year, by accident, I met him by accident, he said, you need to improve your French. I had started French in junior high school. So I went to Paris and I met people, Pertev Naili Boratov, Alexander Benixen, Jean-Louis Bacquet-Cramont. And then I started studying German, going to Germany, Arabic, going to Damascus, Hungarian, going to Hungary twice to study, and studying other languages as well. And I think that has been very, very important in my training, just as important as having studied linguistics as linguistics a little bit, history as history. And at least it gives me some understanding of what students need to be able to work on various projects. And it gives me a certain breadth in terms of my general education and what I can do. And so I think that would be the greatest advice I could give to students. Try to have a solid, broad undergraduate education. You can do Turkology as a master's student too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You know that Kazakhstan is transitioning to the Latin alphabet. As a scientist, what do you think of the new Latin alphabet?
I have had some fights on TV with some famous people in Kazakhstan. I've also had the privilege of getting to know Alimkhan Yunus Bekov and Yunus Bekov and my old friend Erden Kajibek and others who have been advocating a real intelligent approach to the creation of a Kazakh Latin alphabet. There's several fundamental issues that I think which are being forgotten. It's not as bad now as it was before, but I think when they had the original discussion about digraphs, consisting of two separate keystrokes, A plus acute, E plus or I plus acute, and so on, U plus acute. I think people weren't thinking about how computers and computer programs work. That was one issue. Or before that, A, E, O, E, U, E, etc. That's one thing. And so the second issue there is that there's a fundamental problem of whether you're going to repeat Kazakh Cyrillic orthography in Latin, or whether you're going to have a phonemic approach. A phonemic approach. So this is complicated if you don't know Kazakh, and it's complicated if you don't know the Kazakh Cyrillic alphabet. So I'm sorry for those of you who are listening who can't, who may get lost. But let's say that each of the Cyrillic alphabets for Turkic languages used in Soviet times had some unusual features. Okay, so Kazan Tatar orthography isn't good. It's very different from Bashkir orthography. Caucasian languages, Turkic languages have their own problems. In the case of Kazakh, having like the Russian E used for words in Russian like izvestia, and having it also served as like oqi and esti, estide, oqide, and so on, and then having a totally different I for like til or bir, that's really, really, really complicated. And the same thing with UW. So just because Cyrillic orthography does it that way, doesn't mean that you need to repeat it. But I think what constantly we've been seeing is that there's a move to do it so that you can automatically convert Cyrillic Russian by cutting and pasting and changing the font to a Latin that may make it easier for those who know Cyrillic Kazakh. But let me tell you, the problem is that all of those experiments make it impossible for a well-educated European to understand how to pronounce Kazakh. Because my understanding was that President Nazarbayev said that it should be scholars who decide how this works. They haven't been listened to. We should be trying to bring the Turkic world closer together. That's not what the various alphabet projects, including the current alphabet project, do. And it also doesn't make it easier for somebody coming from France or Germany or Turkey to come to Nur Sultan and read something, a street sign. It's just really, really difficult, even for me, to deal with some of the new projects. So I would say what was beautiful about what Alim Hanagay and others did, starting back earlier, I believe, with earlier scholars, is that they reanalyzed Kazakh and to do a phonemic approach, so that you would write like til with til, and you would write oqi with like oq, like noktasız or dotless back I and y, and st could be estiy. So it's analyzing the phonemic concepts and the phonemic inventory as you would in a linguistics class. It was very, very intelligent. So I know that time is going on. So let me just say that the conclusion here is that the current alphabet, which is closer to the Turkish alphabet compared to the earlier one, so you have umlaut and so on, I think this alphabet is much, much better. The emle erejelere, the orthography that they're using right now, is again trying to repeat the mistakes that were made with the Cyrillic Kazakh alphabet. I think if they stick to this current proposed alphabet, but today, tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years from now, change the orthography, there's hope. There's hope. As they say in Turkish, ümitsiz şeytandır.
Yeah. We hope everything will be all right. Mr. Юлай, it's time to wrap our online meeting up. Thank you for speaking. If you have anything to say to our listeners, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much for your interest. Thank you so much for your invitation. If your listeners have collect questions for you that I can discuss in the future, I'd be happy to come back.
Yeah. Thank you,
Mr. Amandık Bolsun. Stay safe.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Юлай. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Bye bye. Sağ olunuz.
Sağ olunuz. Sağ olunuz.